I checked my account balance on a Tuesday morning and almost dropped my phone. $8,000, gone. Just like that. I called the bank first because I thought it was fraud. I was sitting there on the edge of my bed in my bathrobe, holding the phone, waiting on hold, thinking somebody in another state was buying flat screens with my money. But the woman on the line told me something worse. The transactions were at a travel agency, a cruise line, a luxury suite on a 7-day Caribbean cruise, booked 3 days ago, and the name on the reservation was my daughter, Melissa. My own daughter had drained my savings account. I just sat there. I couldn't even cry. I couldn't even scream. I just sat there staring at the wall thinking, what did I do wrong? That was the morning everything fell apart, and by the time it was over, I had changed the locks on my own house, packed up my daughter's entire family, and watched a marriage I once celebrated collapse right in front of me. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back. Because what looks like a simple story about stolen money is actually the most twisted thing that ever happened to my family. And the person who hurt me the most wasn't even the one who took the money. I need to tell you about Melissa, my oldest. She was always the one who needed more attention, more clothes, more validation. When she was 14, she stole $40 out of my purse to buy concert tickets. I found out, I grounded her, she cried. I forgave her. That was my pattern. She hurt me. She performed remorse. I folded. Her younger sister Katie was the opposite. Katie was quiet. Katie worked 2 jobs in high school without being asked. Katie never asked me for anything. And I think that's where the crack started, not between me and Melissa, but between Melissa and Katie. Because Melissa could feel it. She could feel that I trusted Katie more, and instead of trying to earn that trust back, she just got angrier. She got smarter about how she took things. She learned to smile while she did it. Melissa married Derek when she was 23. I didn't like Derek at first, not because he was a bad guy. He was just weak. He was the kind of man who stood in the corner at family gatherings and nodded at whatever Melissa said. He worked at a warehouse. He made decent money, but Melissa controlled every penny. I remember at their wedding, Derek's mother, Linda, pulled me aside in the bathroom and said, "Please watch how she treats him." I laughed it off. I thought she was just being a jealous mother-in-law. I had no idea she was actually begging me to pay attention. I should have listened. Because that woman saw something I refused to see. The wedding itself was a disaster. Not on the surface. On the surface it looked beautiful, but underneath it was ugly. Melissa had demanded we pay for everything. Derek's family offered to split it, and Melissa told them no. She said my family pays because my family has more. I was embarrassed, but I did it. I spent $11,000 on that wedding, and during the reception, Melissa's maid of honor made a toast that included a joke about Derek not being able to afford his own wedding. Everyone laughed. But I looked over at Derek's parents, and his mother Linda was just staring at her plate. His father Gene had his jaw clenched so tight I thought his teeth would crack. That was the first time I saw it. The split, my family on one side, Derek's family on the other, and Melissa standing in the middle controlling everything. Fast forward 4 years. Melissa and Derek had a little boy named Braden. They were living in a house that Derek's parents helped them buy. Linda and Gene put down $20,000 for the down payment, but Melissa made sure the deed was only in her name. I didn't know that at the time. Derek didn't even know that at the time. Melissa had somehow convinced him to sign paperwork he didn't fully understand. She told him it was for tax purposes, and he believed her because that's what he always did. He believed her. Now let me tell you about Katie, because Katie's story is the one that makes everything else make sense. Katie married a man named Ryan 2 years after Melissa. Ryan came from money, or at least his family did. His parents owned a landscaping business that did very well. Katie moved into Ryan's family home, and within 6 months, things changed. Ryan started controlling what she wore, who she texted, when she could visit me. I didn't find out until a year later when Katie showed up at my house with a bruise on her arm and said she slipped. I knew she didn't slip. But Katie wouldn't admit it. She said she was fine. She said I was overreacting. So I did what I always did with my daughters. I believed the one who was lying, and ignored the one who was hurting. I need to say that again because it haunts me. I believed the one who was lying and ignored the one who was hurting. Around this time, Melissa started calling me more often. But it was never just to talk. It was always about money. Can you buy Braden winter clothes? Can you pay for his daycare this month? Derek's hours got cut. Can you help with groceries? And I gave. Every single time I gave. Because that's what grandmothers do, right? That's what mothers do. We give until there's nothing left. My savings account was supposed to be my retirement. It was supposed to be my safety net. But I kept dipping into it for Melissa, and she kept asking for more. Then one night Katie called me crying. Ryan had thrown her phone against the wall because she called me without telling him. She said she wasn't allowed to contact me without his permission. I was shaking. I told her to come home. She said she couldn't. She said Ryan's mother, Patricia, had told her that if she left, Ryan would take full custody of their daughter, and Katie would never see the baby again. And Katie believed her, because Katie was already broken by then. I called Melissa that same night and told her what happened with Katie. I thought my daughters would support each other. I thought Melissa would be angry. Instead, she was quiet for a long time, and then she said, "Well, Katie always did make bad choices." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My daughter just found out her sister was being controlled and possibly abused, and her response was to blame Katie. That's when I first saw the real Melissa. Not the Biao Yan remorse daughter. Not the crying child who stole $40. The real one. Cold, calculating, emotionally dangerous. But I still didn't see the $8,000 coming. The day I found out about the money, I drove to Melissa's house. I didn't call ahead. I just showed up. Derek answered the door in his work clothes. He looked tired. He always looked tired. I asked where Melissa was, and he said she was at the mall with Braden. I walked right past him into the kitchen and sat down at the table. Derek stood there looking at me like I'd lost my mind. I said, "Did you know she took $8,000 from my account?" His face went white. Not guilty white, shocked white. He sat down across from me and said, "What are you talking about?" I told him everything. The bank calls, the cruise reservation, the luxury suite. And Derek put his head in his hands and said, "She told me she got a bonus from work." I didn't believe him at first. I thought he was in on it. I thought they planned it together. But the way he looked at me in that kitchen, I knew. He didn't know. Derek had no idea where the money came from. Melissa had lied to him too. She had been lying to both of us. And that's when I realized something that changed everything. Derek wasn't my enemy. Derek was another victim. I left that house without saying another word. I got in my car and I sat in the driveway for 20 minutes trying to figure out what to do. Part of me wanted to call the police. Part of me wanted to scream. But another part of me, the mother part, the part that always folds, kept saying, "Maybe there's an explanation. Maybe she'll pay it back. Maybe I'm overreacting." Then my phone buzzed. It was a text from Katie. It said, "Mom, please don't tell anyone about Ryan. Please. If Patricia finds out, you know she'll make things worse." And I'm sitting there reading this text from my abused daughter, while my other daughter just stole $8,000 from me, and I thought, what kind of mother am I? What kind of mother raised these two girls and produced one thief and one prisoner? Melissa came home 2 hours later. I was still in the driveway. She saw my car and her face changed. I could see it from where I was sitting. She went from happy to panicked in half a second. She pulled in next to me, got out of her car, and before she could even open her mouth, I said, "I know about the cruise." She didn't even try to deny it. She didn't cry. She didn't perform. She just crossed her arms and said, "You weren't using that money anyway." I wasn't using it, $8,000 that I had saved for 15 years, and she said I wasn't using it. I asked her how she even got access to my account, and she said, "You gave me your PIN number when I picked up your prescription last month." She remembered it. She filed it away in that calculating brain of hers and waited for the right moment. I said, "You stole from your own mother." And she looked at me dead in the eyes and said, "You owe me." I said, "I owe you what?" She said, "You owed me a wedding. You owed me a life where I didn't have to struggle. You gave Katie everything and you gave me nothing." And there it was, the real wound. The thing she'd been carrying for years. She wasn't angry at me for being a bad mother. She was angry at me for loving Katie the way she wanted to be loved. But instead of talking to me about it, she stole from me. I told her she had 2 weeks to return the money, or I was calling the police. She laughed. She actually laughed and said, "You're not going to call the police on your own daughter." And the worst part was, she was right. I wasn't going to, not yet. But then everything escalated. That night, Derek called me. He was whispering on the phone. He said Melissa had come home furious. She had told him that I was trying to control their lives, that I was jealous of their happiness, that I was the problem. And Derek said, "I know none of that is true. I know she took the money. I want to pay you back. I'll take it out of my paycheck." I stopped him right there. I said, "Derek, this isn't your debt." He said, "She's my wife." I said, "She stole from me and lied to you about where it came from." "How long has she been lying to you?" He was quiet for a long time, and then he said something that broke my heart. He said, "I think she's been lying to me since the day we got married." Over the next few days, things got worse. Melissa called my sister and told her that I was mentally unstable, that I was accusing her of things she didn't do, that I was lashing out because I was lonely and bitter. My sister called me and said, "Melissa is really upset. What's going on?" So now my daughter was not only stealing from me, she was running a smear campaign against me to my own family. And she was good at it. Because Melissa had always been good at making herself look like the victim. Then Linda called me, Derek's mother. I hadn't spoken to her since the wedding. She said, "My son told me everything." She said, "I tried to warn you years ago. I tried to tell you that Melissa was controlling him. You didn't listen. And now she's stealing from you and you still won't do anything about it." I said, "Linda, what do you want me to do?" She said, "I want you to help me get my son out of that house." I said, "He's not trapped. He can leave any time he wants." And Linda said, "You don't understand. She's been isolating him from us for 4 years. She told him we didn't care about him. She told him we thought he was a failure. She turned him against his own parents and we couldn't do anything about it. And now he's finally waking up and I need you to be on his side." I didn't know what to say to that. Because Linda was right. I had watched Melissa push Derek's family away and I said nothing. I had watched her make jokes about them at gatherings and I laughed. I was complicit. I helped her isolate him because I thought it was just daughter-in-law and mother-in-law drama. I didn't realize it was a strategy. Meanwhile, Katie's situation was getting darker. Ryan had installed a tracking app on her phone. Patricia, Ryan's mother, was showing up at the house, unannounced, to check on Katie. Katie told me that Patricia had gone through her closet and thrown out clothes she thought were too revealing. Katie was 26 years old and her mother-in-law was treating her like a teenager. I told Katie to document everything. I told her to take photos, save texts. I said, "If you're ever going to get out, you need evidence." And Katie said, "Mom, I can't. She'll take my baby." I said, "She can't take your baby if you have proof of what they're doing to you." But Katie was too afraid, and I understood, because fear doesn't respond to logic. Now here's where things get really twisted, because while all of this was happening with both of my daughters, I discovered something about my own family that I never knew, something that made me understand why both of my daughters ended up in the situations they were in. One afternoon, I was at my house going through old papers trying to find my bank statements for the police report I was finally considering filing, and I found a letter. It was from my father, to my mother, dated 1987. I was 12 years old. The letter said, "I know you took the money out of my account. I know you're hiding it. If you don't put it back, I'm leaving." And next to the letter, in my mother's handwriting, were the words, "He doesn't need to know." My mother had stolen money from my father, the same way Melissa stole from me. The exact same pattern. I sat on my bedroom floor holding that letter and I felt like the ground had opened up beneath me. I wasn't just dealing with a daughter who made a bad choice. I was dealing with a cycle. A generational cycle that I didn't even know existed. My mother did it, my daughter did it, and in between I became the kind of mother who enabled it. I called my mother that night. She's 71 now, lives alone in Arizona. I said, "Mom, did you take money from Dad's account in 1987? There was a long silence, and then she said, "Your father didn't deserve that money. He was going to use it for himself." I said, "Mom, that was his savings." She said, "I was raising 2 children with no help. He was working and I was stuck at home. I deserved it." And I realized my mother felt the same way Melissa felt, entitled, justified, angry at a man for not giving her enough, so she took what she wanted and told herself it was fair. I hung up the phone and I made a decision. The cycle stops with me. I went to Melissa's house the next morning with 3 garbage bags. Derek was at work. Melissa was in the living room watching TV with Brayden. I walked in, went to their bedroom, and started packing. Melissa followed me and said, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm packing your bags." She said, "You're crazy." I said, "Maybe I am. But you're a thief, and you're not going to steal from me and then sit in a house that I helped pay for and pretend nothing happened." She tried to grab the bag out of my hand. We argued in the bedroom while Brayden was in the next room. She said, "If you don't stop, I'll call the police and say you're trespassing." I said, "Go ahead. And tell them what? That your mother found out you stole $8,000 and now you want her removed from the house." She called Derek. She was crying now. The performance was back. She told Derek, "Your mother is here tearing apart our house." Derek said, "My mother isn't there. Your mother is there." And Melissa hung up on him. I finished packing 3 bags, clothes, toiletries, Braden's things. I carried them all out to my car. Melissa stood on the porch screaming at me. The neighbors could hear. I didn't care. I drove home, went inside, and called a locksmith. I changed every lock on my house that afternoon, because I knew what was coming. I knew Melissa would try to come to my house and turn the tables. She would try to make it look like I was the unstable one, and I wasn't going to give her access to me anymore. Derek called me that night. He said, "I saw the bags in your car when I got home. Melissa told me you lost your mind." I said, "Derek, I need you to listen to me very carefully. I know your mother warned you about Melissa before you married her. I know she's been controlling you for years. I know she put the house in only her name. I know she lied about where the cruise money came from. And I know that right now you're standing in that house wondering if you're married to a stranger." He didn't say anything for a long time, and then he said, "I am. I'm standing in my kitchen and I feel like I'm married to a stranger." That was the moment Derek changed. I could hear it in his voice. The weakness was still there, but underneath it, something harder was forming. Something that had been beaten down for 4 years was starting to rise up, and Melissa had no idea. She still thought she controlled him. She still thought he would fold the way he always did. The next week, Melissa tried to file a restraining order against me. She went to the courthouse and told a judge that I was harassing her, that I showed up at her house uninvited, that I removed her belongings from her home. The judge looked at the paperwork and asked if I had stolen anything from her. She said no. He asked if I had threatened her. She said, "Not directly." The judge denied the order. Melissa called me furious. She said, "I'll find another way." I said, "Melissa, you stole $8,000 from me. Every legal move you make brings more attention to what you did." She hung up. But then she did something I didn't expect. She called Katie. Melissa called Katie and told her that I had gone crazy, that I was attacking her family, that Katie needed to stay away from me too. And Katie, who was already being controlled by Ryan and Patricia, believed her sister. Katie called me and said, "Melissa says you're acting unstable." I said, "Katie, your sister stole $8,000 from me." Katie said, "But Melissa said you're making things up because you're lonely." And I realized my daughters were communicating with each other about me instead of talking to me. Melissa was turning Katie against me the same way she turned Derek against his parents. The same pattern, the same strategy, over and over. I said, "Katie, I need you to listen to me, not Melissa, not Ryan, not Patricia, me, your mother." And Katie started crying. She said, "I don't know who to trust anymore. Everyone in my life is lying to me." And I said, "I'm not lying to you. I have never lied to you." And Katie said, "Then why didn't you protect me from Ryan?" That question hit me like a freight train. Why didn't I protect her? Because I was busy protecting Melissa. Because I was busy giving Melissa money and forgiving Melissa and making excuses for Melissa. While Katie was being abused in another house, I was handing cash to the daughter who was manipulating me. I told Katie, "I failed you. I know I failed you. And I'm going to fix it. But I need you to be brave right now. I need you to start documenting what Ryan and Patricia are doing to you. Because I'm going to get you out of there, and this time I'm not going to fold." Something shifted in Katie that day. I could hear it. The same thing I heard in Derek's voice, that hardening, that awakening. My daughters had both been broken by the people closest to them, and they were both starting to realize it at the same time. 2 weeks after I found out about the money, Derek did something nobody expected. He went to a lawyer. Not to divorce Melissa. Not yet. He went to find out what his legal rights were regarding the house. And that's when he found out the truth. The house was in Melissa's name only. He had no legal claim to it. Everything he had paid toward the mortgage for 4 years, gone. His parents' $20,000 down payment, gone. Melissa had set it up so that if anything went wrong, Derek would walk away with nothing. When he told me, his voice was different. It was calm, too calm. He said she planned this from the beginning. I said, "I don't think she planned it. I think she just always kept her options open." He said, "What's the difference?" He was right. The difference didn't matter. The result was the same. Derek confronted Melissa that night. I wasn't there, but he told me about it later. He said he sat her down after Braden went to sleep and said, "I know about the house. I know about your name being the only one on the deed. I know you took $8,000 from your mother, and I know you've been lying to me for 4 years. Melissa didn't cry. She didn't scream. She looked at him and said, "If you leave, you'll never see Braden again." And Derek said, "Try it." He said, "Try to keep my son from me and I will take you to court and I will tell them everything. The stolen money, the deed, the lies, all of it." Melissa slapped him, hard, across the face. And for the first time in 4 years, Derek didn't flinch. He didn't apologize. He didn't back down. He just looked at her and said, "Pack your own bags this time." Meanwhile, Katie was making her move too. She had been secretly saving screenshots of Ryan's texts. She had recorded a conversation where Patricia told her she wasn't allowed to leave the house without permission. She had taken photos of the tracking app on her phone. She had built a file. And one Tuesday morning, while Ryan was at work and Patricia was at a doctor's appointment, Katie put her daughter in the car and drove to my house. She walked through my front door, which now had new locks that only I had the key to, and she said, "I'm done, I'm out." And she handed me a folder thick with evidence. I held that folder, and I looked at my daughter and she looked different. She looked like the Katie I knew before Ryan, before Patricia, before all of it. She looked strong. And I realized that both of my daughter's marriages were falling apart on the same week. Melissa's because her husband finally woke up. Katie's because my daughter finally fought back. But the story doesn't end there, because Melissa found out Katie was at my house, and she lost her mind. Melissa showed up at my door at 10 o'clock at night, pounding, screaming. She said, "Open this door." I said, "No." She said, "Katie is a grown woman, she doesn't need to be hiding at your house." I said, "She's not hiding, she's safe, there's a difference." Melissa said, "You're turning everyone against me. First Derek, now Katie, you're doing this on purpose." I said, "Melissa, you did this on purpose. You stole from me. You lied to your husband, you manipulated your sister, and now you're standing on my porch acting like you're the victim." She said, "I am the victim. I grew up in a house where Katie was the favorite, where I was always second best, where nothing I did was ever good enough." And I said, "That's not true." She said, "It is true, and you know it." I didn't answer, because part of me knew she wasn't entirely wrong. I had treated Katie differently, not because I loved Melissa less, but because Katie was easier. Katie didn't demand, Katie didn't manipulate. Katie just existed, and I gravitated toward her because she didn't exhaust me. And Melissa felt that. She felt it her whole life. And instead of coming to me and saying, "Mom, I feel like you love Katie more," she turned into someone who took what she felt she deserved, but understanding why someone hurts you doesn't excuse them from hurting you. I said through the door, "I'm sorry you felt like that. I'm sorry I made you feel less than, but that does not give you the right to steal from me. It doesn't give you the right to manipulate Derek. It doesn't give you the right to turn Katie against me. And it doesn't give you the right to stand on my porch and act like I owe you something. You made choices, Melissa. Those are your choices, not mine." She left. But the next morning, she did something that changed everything. Melissa went to the police. She filed a report saying I had entered her home without permission and removed her property. She showed them photos of the bags I had packed. She told them I was threatening her. And because she's a good actor, because she knows how to perform, the police sent an officer to my house to question me. I answered the door and the officer said, "Ma'am, we've received a complaint." I said, "I know. My daughter stole $8,000 from me, and when I confronted her, I packed her belongings and removed them from the house." The officer said, "Did you enter her home without permission?" I said, "I've been in that home hundreds of times. I helped them move in. There was no lock changed. There was no trespassing. I walked through the front door like I always do." He said, "But she's saying you removed her property." I said, "I packed clothes for her and her son. I didn't destroy anything. I didn't keep anything. The bags are in my car, you can check right now." The officer went to my car, opened the trunk, saw 3 bags of clothes and children's items. He came back and said, "Ma'am, this is a civil matter. We can't force her to return the money. But I'd advise you to file a formal report about the stolen funds." So I did. Right there on my front porch, I filed a police report against my own daughter for theft. And the officer took the report and said, "This could go either way. It's your word against hers." I said, "I have bank records. I have the cruise reservation in her name." He said, "Then you have a case." Melissa found out I filed the report, and she called me one last time. Her voice was different now. No performance, no crying, just cold. She said, "If you pursue this, I will make sure you never see Braden again." I said, "Melissa, he's my grandson." She said, "Not if I say he isn't," and she hung up. That threat should have destroyed me, but it didn't. Because by that point, something had hardened in me too. I wasn't the same mother who folded 4 years ago. I wasn't the same woman who believed every tear. I had watched both of my daughters suffer, and I had watched myself enable the suffering, and I was done. 3 days later, Derek showed up at my house. He had a stack of papers. He had filed for divorce. He had also filed a motion regarding the house, claiming fraud based on the fact that Melissa had deceived him about the deed. He had contacted his parents. Linda and Jean were standing behind him. Linda looked at me and said, "I've been waiting 4 years for this day." I said, "I know. I'm sorry I didn't listen sooner." Derek said, "I want full custody of Braden. I have texts where Melissa admits she lied about the money. I have emails where she discusses putting the house in her name to protect herself in case of divorce. She planned this. She planned all of it." I looked at those emails and I felt sick. Because they were dated before the wedding, before Braden was born. Melissa had been planning her exit strategy before she even walked down the aisle. She married Derek knowing she would eventually leave him with nothing. She just didn't plan on him waking up. The divorce proceedings were brutal. Melissa hired an aggressive lawyer. She counterfiled, claiming Derek was emotionally abusive. She brought up the fact that he worked long hours and wasn't present for Braden. She produced texts where Derek complained about his marriage to his friends. She tried to paint him as a bad father. But then Derek's lawyer introduced the emails, the ones where Melissa discussed her plan, the ones where she talked about keeping the house in her name, the ones where she referred to Derek as easily controlled. The judge read those emails, and according to Derek's lawyer, his expression changed. Because those emails weren't written in anger. They were written in cold calculation. They were written by someone who viewed marriage as a transaction. Katie's situation resolved differently but just as dramatically. Katie took her evidence to a domestic violence advocacy center. They connected her with a lawyer, who helped her file for an emergency protective order against Ryan. When Ryan was served at work, he called Katie 17 times in 20 minutes. Each call was recorded. Each call violated the order. Katie's lawyer filed a motion for contempt. Ryan's mother, Patricia, tried to intervene. She showed up at the advocacy center and caused a scene. She was escorted out by security. 2 days later, Patricia was also served with a restraining order for harassment. The hearing for Katie's protective order was the most intense day of my life. Ryan sat on one side of the courtroom with his lawyer and his mother. Katie sat on the other side with me and her lawyer. Ryan looked at Katie across the room, and I saw something in his eyes that I'd seen before. In Melissa's eyes, that coldness, that ownership. He didn't see Katie as a person. He saw her as something that belonged to him, and the judge saw it too. When Katie's lawyer presented the evidence, the texts, the recordings, the tracking app, the photos, the judge granted the permanent protective order. Full custody of Katie's daughter went to Katie. Ryan was given supervised visitation. Patricia was barred from any contact. Katie cried in the parking lot after the hearing. Not sad tears, relief tears. She said, "I've been waiting 2 years for someone to believe me." And I said, "I'm sorry it took me so long." The final shock came on the day of Derek and Melissa's custody hearing. Melissa walked into the courthouse looking polished, calm, confident. She had a new lawyer, a new outfit, a new story. She was going to testify that Derek was unfit, that he had anger issues, that she was the stable parent. And she might have pulled it off. Because Melissa is believable when she wants to be. But then Linda stood up. Derek's mother. She asked to speak. The judge allowed it. And Linda said, "Your Honor, I need to tell you something about my son's wife. 4 years ago, before they were married, Melissa came to my house and told me that if I didn't stop interfering in their relationship, she would make sure I never saw my grandson." She said it calmly. She said it with a smile. And I believed her. Because I could see in her eyes that she meant it. So I stepped back. I stopped calling. I stopped visiting. I watched my son get isolated from his family, and I did nothing because I was afraid of her. And I regret that every day. But I'm not afraid anymore. Melissa's lawyer objected. The judge overruled. Because Linda wasn't making accusations, she was describing her own experience. And it matched the pattern in the emails. The calculation, the control, the isolation. Then something happened that nobody expected. Melissa's lawyer asked for a brief recess. During the recess, I was sitting in the hallway outside the courtroom, and Melissa walked past me. She stopped. She looked at me. And for the first time in I don't know how long, I saw something real in her eyes. Not coldness, not calculation, not performance. Fear. She was afraid. And she said one thing to me. She said, "I turned into Mom, didn't I?" And she walked away. I stood in that hallway and I couldn't move. Because she was right. Melissa had turned into my mother, The stealing, the justification, the entitlement, the ability to look someone in the eye and lie without flinching. It had been passed down like a curse, from my mother to Melissa, skipping me but landing on my daughter, and I had watched it happen and I didn't recognize it because I didn't want to see it. The judge awarded Derek primary custody of Braden. Melissa got supervised visitation. The house, the one she had put in her name only, was ordered to be sold and the proceeds split. Derek's parents would be reimbursed their $20,000 from Melissa's share, and the $8,000 she stole from me was noted in the record as part of a pattern of financial deception. After the hearing, Derek came up to me in the parking lot. He had Braden on his hip, and he said, "Thank you for not giving up on me." I said, "I almost did." He said, "I know, but you didn't. And that's why I'm standing here right now instead of still being asleep in that house." Katie moved into an apartment 3 blocks from me. She got a job, she started therapy, her daughter is thriving. Ryan violated the protective order twice and lost his visitation rights entirely. Last I heard, Patricia was telling anyone who would listen that Katie had brainwashed the judge, but nobody was listening to Patricia anymore. Melissa moved to another state. She calls sometimes. Not to apologize, not to make amends, just to talk. And during those calls, I hear glimpses of the daughter I raised. The one who wasn't performing, the one who wasn't calculating, the one who is slowly realizing that she destroyed her own life and has to live with it. I don't know if she'll ever change. I don't know if the cycle is really broken. But I know this: I changed my locks. I packed those bags. I filed that report. And I stopped folding. People ask me if I regret it. Changing the locks, calling the police on my own daughter, standing in that courtroom while my family fell apart in public. And the answer is no. I don't regret it. Because the family I thought I had didn't exist. It was a performance. And the real family, the broken, honest one, only showed up after I stopped watching the show. My mother called me after everything went down. She said, "I heard what happened with Melissa." I said, "Yes." She said, "You shouldn't have called the police on her. She's your daughter." And I said, "Mom, you stole from Dad in 1987 and nobody called the police on you. And look what happened. You taught her that she could take what she wanted and nobody would stop her." There was a long silence. And my mother said, "That's not fair." And I said, "No, it's not. It's not fair at all." I never heard from my mother again after that call. Braden is 4 now. He calls me Nana. Derek brings him over every Sunday. Sometimes Linda and Jean come too. We sit around my table and we eat and we talk, and it's not perfect, but it's real. There's no performance, no calculation. Just people who got hurt trying to figure out how to trust again. Katie asked me recently if I think Melissa will ever come back. I said, "I don't know." She said, "Do you want her to?" And I thought about it for a long time. And I said, "I want her to be okay. But I don't need her to be okay here. Because this house has new locks for a reason. My daughter stole $8,000 from me for a luxury cruise. She never went on that cruise. The reservation was canceled by the travel agency after the police report was filed. $8,000 gone. 4 years of a marriage built on lies. A sister who was abused while I looked the other way. A mother-in-law who tried to warn me and I ignored her. A grandmother who started it all and never took responsibility. That's what $8,000 cost me. That's what it really cost. Not the money. The truth about my family. The truth about my mother. The truth about my daughters. The truth about myself. And I would have never known any of it if she had just asked me for the money. Because I would have given it to her. That's the part that hurts the most. I would have given it to her. She didn't have to steal it. She didn't have to lie. She didn't have to destroy everything. All she had to do was ask. But asking would have meant being vulnerable. It would have meant admitting she needed me. And Melissa would rather steal than need anyone. I changed the locks that afternoon because I thought I was protecting my house. But I was really protecting myself. From her, from the cycle, from the version of me that always said yes. The locks weren't for Melissa. They were for me, to remind me that I have a door and I get to decide who walks through it. Some people will hear this story and say I went too far. They'll say she's my daughter and family comes first. But here's what I learned. Family doesn't come first if family is the one hurting you. Love doesn't mean unlimited access. Forgiveness doesn't mean no consequences. And being a mother doesn't mean being a victim. I packed her bags. I changed the locks. And I broke the cycle. Not for me, for Braden, for Katie's daughter, for the next generation that doesn't even exist yet. Because if I didn't stop it, who would? Melissa wouldn't stop it. My mother wouldn't stop it. It had to be me. Sitting on my bedroom floor with a letter from 1987. realizing that the sins of the mother really do get passed down. Unless someone is willing to say, no more. Not in my house, not on my watch. Not while I'm still breathing. So no, I don't regret it. I regret that it took me this long. I regret that Katie suffered while I was busy enabling Melissa. I regret that Derek spent 4 years being controlled because I didn't listen to his mother. I regret that I wasn't brave enough to see the truth sooner. But I see it now. And seeing it, even when it's ugly, even when it breaks your heart, even when it means standing alone in a hallway outside a courtroom while your daughter walks away from you, seeing it is better than living in the dark. Because the dark is where Melissa lived. The dark is where my mother still lives. The dark is where secrets grow into monsters. I turned on the light. I changed the locks. And I'm never going back into the dark again.